What time is it? It's time for another Every Other Wednesday.
So good. Welcome, everyone. We'll just have a few questions for you and just some greetings for you as you come in. You'll notice there is a new and perhaps unfamiliar face among us, and a couple of faces missing from us today, and we'll explain all of that.
But she may be an unfamiliar face, but she's not an unfamiliar text.
That's right, because you will have seen her name in the chat from time to time.
Exactly. Speaking of chat,
Speaking of
if you take a look at your chat and it does not default on the to line to everyone, we'd ask you to drop that drop-down menu and click it so that it does share with everyone, so we can hear everyone's thoughts. And just to make sure it's working, let's give them a question. And
Let's do that.
The question we were thinking about, given today's topic, is going to be: share with us a conversation that you've had in the past that you were really not looking forward to. And,
so like
we said that
your most dreaded work conversation.
It doesn't have to be work, just the most dreaded conversation ever. And I mean, if it ended in "I do," so be it.
All right, good. Oh, so performance management, says Jenny. Shelby, I just handed in my resignation on Monday and was nervous all weekend. Did you think they were not going to?
Congratulations. Woot, woot.
Yeah, congratulations on that, we think. Yeah. Yeah, so tell us some more. So we've got a couple. All right. Jenny's saying good for you. Yes, it was a very good move.
All right.
So,
nicely done.
Shelby. Excellent. Very good. Good. Yeah. So what are some others? What are some dreaded conversations, work related or not work related? What we're going to do today is going to be primarily work related, but Gail says terminated an employee who denied an improvement plan. The meeting went downhill very quickly. It would have if I had been leading that conversation. What I think we'll hear from Anna today on some ideas that could maybe keep those conversations at least level, if not going uphill. Krista says telling someone their position was being eliminated. Yes, very difficult conversations. When you need to discuss an employee's potential alcohol or drug problem. Yeah, oh, this is getting dark, but I mean, that's the nature of what things are. Isn't it?
I once had to tell Richard about his hair. It was very uncomfortable.
At least, well, I won't even comment. All of it, it's interesting. All four of us, we do have hair. That's not the case with every one of our gender at our age, at my age anyway. Okay, switching tasks around on a team, changing management, basically dealing with staff anxiety related to changes. Yeah, that's exactly the kind of things that I would expect. Well, yeah. Let's go ahead and
I was going to change in general, right? Yeah, so, I very official because Mike's not here. Today is April 5th, 2023, and it is time for an Every Other Wednesday.
Welcome, everyone. And so every other Wednesday, that's the cue for the following.
What time is it? It's time for another Every Other Wednesday.
All right, good. I hope that came through okay. Welcome, everyone, to yet another Every Other Wednesday. As Sanjay said, today is April 5th, 2023. I'm Richard Haddon. I'm a speaker and author. I live in Jacksonville, Florida. That's where I am today. And I read, speak, and write about employee engagement, retention, recruitment, leadership, the workplace, all of those good things. And I want to introduce one of my three regular co-hosts, two of whom are not here. We'll address that later. But the one who is...
My name is Sanjay Nath. I'm based just outside of Toronto, Ontario in Canada. I'm a speaker and author focusing on leadership and performance. And I should mention, we're having on and off thunderstorms and lightning all over the place. So there's a high propensity or high potential for me to black out at some point. In which case, Richard, you're not in charge. Anna, you will be in charge. Okay, just so.
Leave it to the responsible adult in the group. Yes, very good. Right. And Jeff Tobe and Michael Kerr are not here today. Each of them had other obligations and are traveling. And so we're glad to have all of you and Sanjay and me. And it is now my pleasure to introduce our special guest host, Anna Wildman. Anna is a friend I've never met. You have those? I have a few of those, and Anna and I have been in contact for several years now, mainly by email and so forth. And I do have a copy, which I am delighted to have, of her book, which is called Now You're Talking, The Manager's Complete Handbook to Leading Great Conversations at Work, Even the Tough Ones. Welcome to Every Other Wednesday, Anna Wildman.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here. I really appreciate it.
So Anna, tell our group a little bit about your background and what you do now and what brought you to what you do now.
So what I do now is help managers lead those face-to-face conversations, and I deliver training in my day job. But what brought me to this? Well, I grew up on the moorland in the West Country of the UK on a farm, and as you do, ran away to sea as soon as I possibly could. A big family of kids, you kind of do that, and joined the Navy and spent 10 years there. And it was an interesting life because you do a specialist skill, and I was loosely tagged as a warfare officer, but you always have a group to look after and do management skills as we know them. And when I left after 10 years, I joined Cathay Pacific and spent a few years there helping them to roll out a new performance management workshop, and have continued since then. And that's kind of what's brought me to where I am now. Any more, or is that enough?
Well, that's good for right now. As Anna mentioned, she was brought up in the UK, and in fact, she is there at the moment. And so yes, Anna lives in the south part of England. Anna and I have something else in common, and that is that we are both married to Scots. That does not mean our spouses' names are Scott. Her husband and my wife are both from Scotland. In fact, pretty much from the same general area of Scotland. So anyway, Anna and I speak very much the same language. But Anna, we wanted to talk with you today about really the topic that you have a lot of expertise in, and that is having conversations at work. And I mentioned that this was not just a plug. This has become a reference book for me. Now You're Talking, and the thing that I appreciate so much about it, and I've had it for some time, folks. This is not one that Anna sent me when we decided that that she was going to be a guest here. I've had this for some time. And so what I really appreciated about it is that if you have a situation that you are hoping to have a conversation, or maybe not hoping to have a conversation, but it is inevitable you're going to have a conversation about it. There are 10 very specific chapters here that will, with a lot of detail underneath. If you need to understand how to have a conversation about your success as a manager, about your startup conversations, about goal setting, developmental planning conversations, coaching, motivation, positive feedback, developmental feedback, review conversations, and compensation conversations, this is a great guide. And I wouldn't say that it's a script at all. It's a planning guide, and it does give you some ideas for wording and what to say, but it really helps you to think through what you're going to say, what is the purpose of what you're going to say, and how to say it in an effective way. And so yeah.
If I can jump in very quickly. So what I liked about it is there's kind of two parts to the book. There's the upfront is the proactive piece. It's the success and goal setting and that kind of thing. But there's also the reactive, which is the more difficult conversations. And again, you provide and you make this emphasis too that it's not the message and it's not the process. It's the wording that can be the most important piece of this. So my question for you, Anna, is around this idea of the proactive versus the reactive stuff. Which do you think is actually more important, the more important skill? To be able to have the difficult conversation, or to be able to have these, set yourself up for success conversations?
Goodness, that's a good question. I've never been asked that before.
Leave it to Sunday.
The one that managers seem to want most are all the difficult ones. How to tell someone they haven't been promoted, they're not getting a pay rise. Some of the the topics that came up in the chat, performance improvement plans, that type of thing. And I realized pretty quickly as a trainer after I'd left the Navy, I was asked in a training workshop. So I would run training workshops and we would try conversations out. And suddenly one of my rather alarming participants said, "So you do it. You know, you sit in the front and lead this conversation." And I had a go, but I really quickly realized that unless you've got some sort of structure to this,
Yeah.
and some ideas of the words that work, you can lose confidence pretty quickly. So, in answer to your question, Sanjay, I think if people feel more confident about the tough stuff, they'll have more conversations in general, and it tends to be, the sort of back end that pushes the front end. Um, the one difficult, interestingly though, on your conversation, the one that is probably one of the most difficult to get right, not the most worrying, but the most difficult to get right, is positive feedback. Because that just tends to be, hey, great job, well done, keep going. And you can get a lot more value out of that. But does that answer your question? She said,
Yeah,
being a trainer.
absolutely. And obviously, again, no right answer, but I'm just in your like in your expertise and with your experiences, that's interesting. So what I'm hearing you say is, yeah, having the skill set to have the difficult conversation allows you to open up and have I don't want to say easier conversation, but those preemptive, those proactive conversations.
So Anna, you mentioned that particular example of giving positive feedback. Can you I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit, but hey, you wrote the book. Can you give us an example maybe of something, using a framework, a structure, which is so much what I find valuable in your work, for that? Let's just take that example.
Yeah, sorry, piggyback on that. All the positive, constructive conversations, you can have those with me, but the difficult ones you can have with Richard during this call. So.
So yes, a lot of everybody listening will be very familiar with different feedback models, and I've always been pressed to say, 3 steps. Don't give us any more than 3 steps for anything. And I'm putting videos out of example conversations at the moment on LinkedIn that just have 3 tips. And I'll let everybody decide on this. There are some great feedback models out, but here's the one I've got, and it's 5. So it's brace. But let's have a look and see what you think. So the initial starting place is, if you're going to have a conversation and I'm your staff member, the place to start with is, what do you want to talk about? And how big is it? Is the sky falling in, or is it something that's relatively simple or straightforward? And I call that the context that the feedback is given it. I just need to get a sense of whether this really matters and whether I need to pay a lot of attention. And that's then followed. A lot of managers will say something like, maybe, let's take a bad conversation. You're not a good team player. And I realized that staff really crave specific examples. So the second step is then color it in, illustrate it with a couple of examples. Do this together, make it coaching. Doesn't have to be, I saw this. It's just say, let's have a look at how this rolled out and what you saw and what happened. But that's it really in terms of opening the conversation. Then hand over to them and just say, what do you think is the cause behind it? So the next step I've put, and it spells CEDAR, CEDAR. This one is diagnosis. What happened? What were the causes? What do you think's behind this? And it's not always something that they've done. Maybe it's something that has gone on in the bigger surroundings, something within the team, something external, marketplace pressures and that kind of thing. So set the context, give examples, then diagnose. And then out of that, the A is ask them what actions they'd like to take. Not compulsory, maybe they just needed to know the information, but what actions will they want to take going forward? And of course, you support that. And the last bit is follow up. Always just, if it matters, then review. And that's the R. And just check in with them. When would you like to follow up, and how soon? And let them control all of those last 3 steps: diagnosis, action, and review. it's much more of a coaching style. Now, lots of folk will be familiar with, and we chatted in the setup for this about, and if anybody wants to put feedback models that you use and find
Yeah,
helpful,
that would be
then
great.
whack them in the chat. But situation behavior impact is a very popular one.
Yeah.
But actually what I'm doing is I'm actually packing all those 3 steps into context. I'm saying, what is the situation? How big is it? What was it? And then moving on to the examples, then doing the diagnosis, action and review. So it takes that and moves it much further forward, if that makes sense.
So Anna, I'm going to put in the chat, just summarize the CEDAR acronym. Can you give that to us again? C is
so
context.
C is context. Yeah, how big? What was the impact? How much does it matter? Next one is E, examples. Few illustrations, usually just 1 or 2 is all that people need, but they need that clarity. D is diagnosis, the analysis of the cause behind it. A is, so what actions do they want to take? And R is review, when should we follow up?
Okay, excellent. So context, examples, diagnosis, action, and review. Okay, very good. Thank you.
So, and again, but this CEDAR can work on either, but really this is the overall overarching philosophy, regardless of whether I'm having, again, a positive conversation or a negative conversation, or even a neutral conversation. This is the philosophy. But what are the nuances that change from conversation to conversation? Because again, this is the overarching philosophy, but now I have to tell Richard he's fired. What are the nuances?
Yeah.
I'm afraid by this time it's way too late. We'll rewind a little bit and say,
what about a normal human being then?
Yeah. So let's say you had a, in my courses sometimes, and I say let's take this sort of strike 1, strike 2, strike 3, and the strike 1 is, how's it going? You've got challenges in this area. What do you want to do about them? Keeping it light. So then still use the steps, but really simply, context is, Richard, I know you've got a really big challenge. Actually, why don't you use me as your bad employee? Anna, you've got a really big challenge coming up here. Here's a couple of examples of what I see are the frustrations with this. What are you seeing? Then simply, what do you think is behind this? What are some of the causes to this? The diagnosis step, keeping that really simple, but it just guides you through. What would help you? What actions do you want to take? What would be useful in terms of going forward? Let me choose first. And managers are what I call heat-seeking solution finders. They just want to get this solved, and I know the answer, but try not to do that. Do give your suggestions, but hold back. And then ask me where do I, what support do I need, and when should we follow up? Now the nuances with that are, it's almost coaching in every step, which is different from most feedback models. It's to say, help to illustrate it, but let me take responsibility for what's happening to me and how I'm doing this. And I have put a specific example of this up on LinkedIn and on my website. If people, the one that went up today is developmental feedback. It shows those steps in action if anybody wants to have a look.
Speaking of that, Anna, could we I'll put in the chat, are you happy for people to connect with you on LinkedIn? I presume so.
No, totally delighted. And
okay. So if you'll give me that, and then also your website, and I'll put that in the chat right now.
Super, thank you. That's really great, and I can obviously send that afterwards if.
So what is the LinkedIn? What is your LinkedIn name?
Anna Wildman. Yeah.
That keeps it simple. And
be there, but if not, then I'll find the link for you.
Okay, and your website is?
Slightly more tricky, I'm afraid. It's a
I like it though.
It's oil in the engine, all one word, oil in the engine, because that's what these conversations are. They just keep the wheels of of each team going. So oilintheengine.com. Yeah, super.
Very good. Thank you. Yeah.
And a couple of the videos, lots of these videos will go up on that. I've just released 3 on LinkedIn so far, but they show some of those steps in action.
Okay.
But we've also put up acting like a diva. If you've got a diva performer, we're going to do body odor. We're going to do responding aggressively to others, to colleagues, all as many of the bad ones as we possibly can.
Many of the bad ones. And these will be videos, so I guess we'll be able to see examples of how this takes place.
Yeah, I just introduced them, and then I've got they're actors, but really good. So do comment on it, and but be very interested if people want to add their experience too in the comments boxes.
Thank you.
But yeah, sometimes you just need to see it working.
Yeah. You can read about it, but seeing it, I think, adds a different context. And I was thinking. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, speaking of that idea of seeing about it, seeing, because when you see, you really learn. Where do you sit on the fence of having other people watch or listen in on a difficult conversation? Meaning, so for example, if someone's not performing well, and the idea isn't to publicly berate him or her, but to hold people to a certain level of accountability, where do you sit on that?
It's a challenge, isn't it? And everybody listening in will probably have some experience of this, and I'd be interested to know what that is. I mean, I'd love to ask you, but my own take would be, if you can, give the manager the tools to do it themselves first. Consult with them, give them some support and so on, so that they know what they're doing. But if you do need to do that, it needs to be with the agreement of all, because otherwise it's going to seem like it's us against them. No conversation ideally gets to that point. They're all about just helping with ideas. Sometimes you do need an expert in to be able to say, here's possibilities about where to go next if you're really struggling with someone. But it is intimidating for anybody to be 2 against 1. So
yeah,
pre-conversation positioning, I think, for why that second person is in would be critical.
Okay.
Yeah, any thoughts from your side?
Well, the question that has been running around in my mind is, do you find that, is there a good mix of how much, if it's a manager and a staff member, do you find there's a good mix of how much the manager is talking and how much the staff member is talking? In other words, the shared airtime, is there something to that, or is it just let it happen organically?
Organically would be great. My workshops tend to focus on switching that balance from 60% manager, 40 staff to the other way around.
Okay. So a little bit more on the side of the staff member than the manager. Do you find that I don't want to paint all managers with a brush, but I know when I was a manager, I tended to, of course, I'm a talker anyway, and I would find myself, I would actually be cognizant of monopolizing the conversation, and I would have to very consciously hold back. I mean, is that something that you find in practice?
Absolutely, totally. It comes from a really good place. Usually, sometimes it comes from nerves, but usually it comes from wanting to help. Quite often it comes from being under time pressure yourself, so you want to get the answer out there and help someone. But then you own it, and the suggestions become yours, and I'm just doing what you want me to do. A much better, it takes longer in the first place, but a much better way is to ask great questions. But it will speed up the process, and it'll encourage me to take a lot more accountability going forward.
Yeah.
If you can change that a little bit.
And that's one of the things I like about the book, is you give some great questions to ask, things that I wouldn't have thought of that you can bring into the conversation. Of course, then when you ask a question, that can take the conversation in a completely different and hopefully positive direction.
So I can be a bit, over enthusiastic about the fact that culture in the end is going to be, I'll judge the culture of the organization by my relationship with my manager. And there's some great research by Gallup showing that if you've got a performance management process, people will not worry about that. They'll just judge it based on my conversation with you. And so being able to ask those questions, have super simple tips. On my website, I've got one-page guides in the resources section, which are the one pages, the too long didn't read bits that you referred to, Sanjay, at the back of each chapter. The more you can help managers just with some simple tips, a couple of questions, the better it would be.
Great.
So again, in the book, there's a lot of scripts, and you have processes, and you don't literally have, but there's checklists and that sort of thing. So where do you philosophically sit on this idea between 100% organic and 100% scripted? Because you can't be either, right? You can't go in organically, not have a clue because you're going to be lost, and you can't go in going, all right, I need to use this word and be a robot, because there's no connection and there's no empathy and there's no, rapport. So how do you walk the line? Where do you find that balance?
Yeah, so there you have the magic, right? Because it must be your language, your style, and so on. But if the reason I've put some guidance in the book is, if you don't start somewhere, as you say, you have no idea what you're doing. So if I can show, and the book is written in American English, but I'm aware that it comes across in a British way. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see what people think. But there are words there that you can then adapt, or just see, oh, okay, so I see what you mean about the sort of open questions to ask in that area. But make it make it authentic. Totally right.
So, you're talking about this whole idea of the right diction, the right word choice can make such a fundamental difference. I joke, as you guys know, I've been speaking for a long time. I just had my 28th anniversary as a professional speaker. 28 years ago, the only group I had credibility with was students. And so I often joke, say I'm bilingual. I say I speak adult and student, and they're two completely different languages. So there's a joke that I use for years with students, and I still use it. At one point I go, how many people here have really immature friends? And if you do that with students, they'll like giggle and point and like, hey, it's the funniest thing ever. If I go to an adult group and say, how many people here have really immature friends, a gap of distance, of awkwardness will ensue. It'll be like, he doesn't get us. But just changing the one word, I can get away with the same joke. And it literally took me years to figure that out. It's a trial and error thing. But if I say, how many people here have really immature spouses, all of a sudden the adults will start acting like the kids. They'll be like, that's me. So to your point, that one word can make such a big difference. And if it's not who you are authentically, people will not say their word choice didn't match their personality. They'll just go,
he's a fake. Yeah.
It didn't feel right. I don't trust him. I don't trust her. There's something off. So I think that's such an important thing to emphasize. It has to be authentic to who you are.
Most of the guidance, I'm totally right. And most of the guidance in the book is based on good questions to ask anyway, and giving people a simple structure through. They're not all my structure. They're not all about Cedar, but at least, well, 6 of the tough conversations are the ones around acting like a diva, poor behavior, some of those difficult ones. But I also use John Whitmore's Grow, which is so popular for coaching. So sometimes there was a really great model out there. But you're right. Work out what works for you, what works for the person that's listening to you. But if you've got an idea of where to start and where you're going, that'll help it stop being sort of a never-ending circle of not going anywhere with this person, because that's hugely frustrating.
And actually, what you just said there, I think is also another really golden point. What works for you is important, but also what works for the other person. And that's probably more important, because if you're a sarcastic bugger and that's authentic to who you are, but the other person is an emotional tree hugger and you're like jibing them with sarcasms in a difficult conversation, although that may be what you want to hear, you have to learn to speak the language of the person which you're addressing.
Yeah.
And so one of the conversations I cover right at the beginning of the book is, how do you set that relationship up with a staff member? How do you learn what that is, exactly as you've just described, Sanjay? So what do you talk through an approach, not the job, it's not goal setting, it's saying what approach works for you? A great question folk often ask is, when you've had a manager in the past, what made a really great manager for you, and that kind of thing. But it's also about what you need as a manager, the ability for you to be able to articulate what matters to you, and for that to be a two-way street. Just for once in that chapter, there are three things to talk about. Occasionally that talks about what approach do we both need. What are our values, the overarching values that matter to us? And the last one is, what boundaries do we both have, so that we can start airing those nice and early on. And of course, lots of boundaries are coming out now with hybrid working and those sorts of things. But you have them too as a manager. Let's pop them on the table. Richard, are you coming across some of those issues in your presentations? I'm guessing you are.
I certainly am, and especially now, as you say, as the things are kind of settling into what's going to be for the next little while in terms of remote and hybrid. How remote are we? How hybrid are we? That kind of thing. And it's interesting. But we just put a post on our blog just this week talking about, people say, well, it's difficult this is different. This is difficult having these conversations. And my response is, well, yeah, it is. It's not impossible, but it's different. And it's all part of the evolution, if you will, of how culture changes, how the workplace changes, and you do have to develop new skills. And so that makes me think about, is there a difference between having a conversation in the room, the same room where you're breathing the same air, or having a conversation as we are now, through a video chat? What's your thinking on that, Anna?
It's been a long road, hasn't it, for everybody over the last couple of years, and I think we've got much better at understanding, at using the medium, and being relaxed and making relationships. And interestingly, I've come across colleagues who've said that they've been able to conduct whole negotiations and form really good bonds just as well online as they have been face to face. I think it relies a lot on authenticity online. I think that lends itself to authenticity. I mean, you see in people's home and kids coming running in and so on, and I think that's a great thing, that kind of whole person approach. Certainly once when we had in the Navy, right? Because you were going to sea, and you just had to think about the whole person. But I think it takes more effort. I don't know what folk think, and if you want to put any comments.
I'd love to hear from some comments in the chat. Carol, who's one of our, I think Carol wins the Perfect Attendance Award. She is here very often, and she said, you said earlier that the manager needs to determine whether what the employee says is important or not so important, or something like that. She says, I would imagine that it's important to the employee, even if it's not important to the manager. So yeah, I guess, what if there's that thing, the manager doesn't see it as that big a deal, but the employee, yeah, it's an issue for them. Is there a model that helps to reconcile the two differences?
And that boils down to the openness of the manager, being able to talk about that. And I talk in the book about the manager needing to be able to take feedback as well as give it, and to be able to hear what they need to do differently to support the employee. But Carol's absolutely right. And if you're dismissing something that an employee wants to talk about, that signal, is pretty clear.
I've found when that happens, that the employee just wants to make the message become even louder. If you dismiss it, then they're gonna elevate it.
I also think there's a big responsibility on the employer side of things to not only have these conversations and ask, what's important to you, what is your style, what approach do you appreciate, but I think the observation piece is really important as well. because sometimes we're trained to say things that we don't really mean. As an example, if you ask a typical worker, what's more important to you, family or work? And you're a bad human being if you don't say family. But if you look at what people demonstrate, and if they're keep missing their kids' game and they're working overtime, they're in on the weekends, and et cetera, then although they're saying one thing, they're not actually demonstrating that. So sometimes, even though they say one thing, we know otherwise just from watching their behaviors that, yeah, they say they don't like public recognition, but they're always, look at me, look at me, look at me. So I'm making a mental note as an employer to kind of go, yeah, they say that, but that's not necessarily what I'm observing. And so you kind of, again, you got to use your experience and your gut to make the decision that you think is best for that particular individual.
Yeah.
It's an interesting one because some of the values, so I've got a whole list of values on the website, and there are many more, but some of them are quite hard values. They might be things like wealth, for example. I really want to retire early and I'm going to gun for it, and we're kind of sort of sitting back and I'm not sure what to do about that. So we hear things and have to understand things about our team that maybe aren't our own values. We don't share them, so it can work both ways. Yeah.
We have a question from Ada, and she's talking about that she can do fine connecting online if both she and the other person have their cameras on. What if she does and they don't? Yeah, that would really create an imbalance, I would think. But then when we think about back in the old days, I mean, like 2019, when we weren't doing this very much at all, this was really, kind of exotic. And we were doing everything on the phone. Is there a difference, Anna, in having difficult conversations simply over the phone, where all you have is the sound of their voice?
Yeah, you're going to have to work even harder with that one because you need to have had the relationship, and so the build up, this needs to be very, so you can't suddenly wing in on a really tough conversation like this. It needs to be a relationship that's already established.
Yeah.
I mean, I experienced this. I mean, when I was working in Hong Kong, some of our team would go and work in China. They would be 3,000 miles away, and we would have at that time no great internet, so you had to be able to reach out to them by phone. It's not great, and everybody will know it's a sort of very much a third best, but work hard at the relationship, work hard at the listening if you have no other choice. But I'm like Ada, online, hopefully people are now getting it. Hopefully people are pretty relaxed.
It's a matter of, too, when you have lemons, you make lemonade. I mean, remember there was I had pen pals growing up, and how excited you were to get something in the snail mail. And this idea of talking on the phone was a big treat. And when we go from this to the hologram 3D projections, which is going to be here in a couple of years, we're going to go like, remember those losers that did it on video calls? Right? And then we're going to be zapping people back and forth. So it's a matter of people showing up to the game that's offered. And if all you have is voice, then you do voice. And if all you have is a post-it note, you do a post-it note. And if you do in person, great. Provided, again, it fits the values and it fits the budget and it fits the logistics. But really the goal here, the high level goal, is about communication in a trustworthy way. I mean, another thing that comes very evident in the book is this idea of, it's not about tricking people or pulling one over on them. It's be frank, be honest, and not necessarily be blunt, but get to the point, because people admire that straightforwardness, especially in a difficult conversation. Don't pussyfoot around and, oh well, it would be nice, and so let's sing kumbaya, and this whole idea of, when I remember when I was younger, they used to talk about the poop sandwich, right? Say something nice, say something mean, say something nice. And it became so formulaic that it became,
everybody knew what was coming next. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And it really, Anna, I mean, it really is about building a relationship, isn't it? I can think of so many examples in my life, and I'm sure everyone on the call can, when you have had difficult conversations with someone. Maybe you were the employee, and that manager was very good at having these conversations. And it really does strengthen the relationship and make it better.
It is interesting. From my days in the Navy, you could take a failing ship and just change the captain, only one person, and the entire ship would change their performance. Go from a failing ship to a highly successful one, and that it goes all the way down through. The challenge for managers is, what do I do if I'm in an organization? I want to ask Shelby, actually, why did he resign? But we can't go back there. But if you've got an organization and you're trying your best for your team, keep faith. It really matters to your people how you are, not how the organization is.
And that's a very good point too. That one person, you're talking the Navy, but what about sports teams when they change the coach or bring in a new player, or corporations, or new CEO, or family members, or significant others? Like, one person can have a very significant impact.
Yeah. Anna, we have only about 4 minutes. Can you believe the time warp that we go into here? We have only about 4 minutes. I wonder, what's another really good meaty example that you could really quickly kind of help us to illustrate the type of conversation?
A really simple one. When you're talking about positive feedback, you lead first. Don't say to someone,
don't say, brag on yourself, right?
Yeah. Just in a performance review, say, here's, and don't be afraid to do the negative stuff, but lead with the best that you possibly can, because people are trying their best and working really hard. And I would say it helps people understand, do diagnose why they're doing something well. It sounds a bit convoluted, but people need to understand what skills they're bringing to the table, and that's the positive feedback bit. But if I've only got a minute, just to say to everybody, if you are bringing an ebook out in a couple of weeks' time, and if anybody would be interested to see the ebook in exchange for, if I could be so impolite as to say, could you do this? In exchange for reposting some of my LinkedIn posts, it would be fantastic to get the word out there, and I'd be delighted to send you a free download.
Excellent. How can they access that? I want to put this in the chat.
So the easiest thing to do is if I give you a link, and I should have done that. So could you give me 2 seconds and I'll find a link?
Sure, go right ahead. Yes.
We'll talk about her while she's doing that.
Right. Yeah.
By the way, I do want to point out that she the very English, proper, polite, Canadian-esque, like all you Americans, however, on the other hand, she was apologizing for going, asking for something in fair exchange. I thought that was very.
I know. So many of us Americans would just say, right, okay, here's what I need you to do. All right, Wendy at Brain.
No, sorry, that's me. Okay. That link hasn't picked up. Let me try one more time. Copy link. Me being ridiculous. Let's try. Yeah, Wendy very kindly said she would be one.
Look at that, you're selling books. Shelby.
Let's try this. It's on Book Funnel. Let's try this. Yes.
Oh, Anna, let me make sure I understand. So the ebook that you're referring to, is it this or is it a different book?
It's that one.
It is this book in an ebook version. Okay, very, very good. Okay. And so if you will go to dl.bookfunnel.com/ all of that, that'll take you there. And again, Anna is asking if you would please be so kind as to connect with her on LinkedIn and then repost some of her and share some of her links, some of her posts there. That would be very helpful. And that makes it a good win-win for everyone here.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Tell you what, any last 1 minute piece of advice for having the great conversations at work, Anna? One last thing you would tell us.
I would say just practice having a go and work with your team member to say, there are sheets on the website for their half of the conversation. It's not just about you having to do all the hard work, it's about them too. So if you download theirs as well, yours are all in gold, theirs are all in green, hand them out and say, let's get this conversation right. Let's have a look at what's here, see what we agree with, what we don't.
That's great. And I've again put the website on in the chat. It's oilintheengine.com. and a lot of great resources there. You've been a terrific resource for us already today, Anna. It has been a total pleasure and delight to speak with you, and thank you for sharing your wisdom and your practical ideas with us. I know everybody here can benefit from having better conversations. You're getting a lot of chat love coming in through the chat. So thank you again. And Sanjay, any final words from you?
I just want to say again, thank you, Anna. Thank you for filling our brains. This is very practical stuff, which is fantastic. I do want to say to everyone, thank you for joining us. Please do join us again in 2 weeks. That'll be April 19th.
19th. Yeah, you're the math guy.
Feel free to invite your
14.
be sure to invite your spawn and neighbors and loved ones and managers and everyone else. Otherwise, I want to say thank you for taking the time. Hopefully this is as much value for you as it was for me, and we will see you every other Wednesday.
Every other Wednesday. Bye.
Thanks, folks.
Bye, Anna.